some of us in the public sector, we're very reticent to talk about pricing. And it's always very interesting because pricing has been around in fact, it was the way roads used to be operated a long time ago. At the turn of the century, most roads were priced. But today we seem to be very cagey about talking about pricing. Just about every time we talk about it, it's almost like it's a new topic. Like we're just beginning to think about pricing, when in fact, we've lived with it forever. We have to do it, we have to deal with it, and it's always sensitive. And the notion is that when you talk about pricing, people think there are all kinds of imaginations that people have. It's government's heavy-handedness, it's taxation, it's all of these other things. But the one thing that's fundamental that we need to think about when we think about price, and hopefully at least the way I approach it, is the transportation system cannot be allowed to just be used without management. And so we always talked about managed lanes. And it's like any utility. If it's just unregulated in the way it's used, there will be inefficiencies in the way it's used. And really, the notion of pricing is about trying to get the system to be more efficient. It's a very finite utility, it's a very finite resource. How do we manage that resource such that we can get the most efficiency out of it? Now, if I don't need to travel, if I don't need to travel at 7 o'clock in the morning, if I can make my trip at 9 o'clock or at 10 o'clock, and it would make no difference to my life, why do I decide to travel at 7? Because it's open, I can use it. If there's an incentive for me to not use it at 7, and then I might be more rational and use it at 9 o'clock when it's actually better for everybody else, including myself, to get where I need to go on time. When you have a system in Southern California, such as we have, trying to move the economy, basically, it's the economy in motion and transportation, whether you talk about highways or railways or the transit system, it's moving people and goods back and forth. That's one of the essence of transportation. If you want to stay competitive as a region, which we want to be competitive as a region, we are, I believe, the 16th largest economy in the world. And we don't get to be that way without a world-class transportation system, without the arteries and the movement of goods and services. We get to be that way because we actually have the capacity to interact and have economic activity occur. And to continue to maintain that trillion-dollar economy and grow it and be competitive, we have to make sure that our system doesn't get bogged down. To the extent that the system becomes inefficient and you can't move goods, the rational economy will find a different way to move those goods, and it might be away from the region. So that's the imperative that we have in the planning of the system as we go forward. As we build or expand or manage the system, we're keeping that in mind, that it's about mobility, it's about accessibility, and it's about throughput. When we talk about express lanes or managed lanes, we're talking about high occupancy, price managed lanes. It's basically a tolled facility, maybe a high occupancy toll facility, and you've seen some of them around here. I mean, there are numerous around here, especially. I took one today. I was on the I-10, and I queue jumped basically on the I-10 to get here, and that allows folks to make that choice. Not everybody that has a transponder tends to use it all the time, in fact. So you notice that it's an opportunity that's available to make the system a little bit more efficient if you need to. We also make sure that we make, in terms of equity, we make capacity available for buses and transit to use the same system. We think in terms of dynamic pricing, where the price is not one size fits all. It's really to manage the demand for the time. And so at certain times of the day, if you want to get on the road, the cost is a little higher than other times of the day. If you wanted to travel anywhere around the region at 2 in the morning, have at it. It's wide open, and you can be anywhere at the time you need to be there. But if you want to use a system at 7 o'clock in the morning, everybody else wants to be in there. We want to make sure that you absolutely need to be there. That's really the essence of thinking of it as a utility. And so having that dynamic and variable pricing also helps to keep the lane moving. And one outcome of that is when you have free flow, to the extent that you can manage the system to maintain a level of free flow, you actually have benefits for the environment in that respect, because you're not having the hot soak situation where everybody's stopped. And so it's trying to manage, whether it's through ramp metering or managed lanes, you're trying to manage for free flow, as my friends at Caltrans will attest to. The concept of managed lanes is not new. It's replete across the country. There are several projects that are already in place, like I said, in Southern California, definitely in Northern California, in the Bay Area, but more so across the country. So we're not doing anything by any means that's different. What we're seeing, we have a really huge density of high occupancy lanes here in Southern California. What we're seeing is the degradation of those lanes. The intent of high occupancy lanes was to encourage folks to carpool and give them the incentive that if you do in fact carpool, you can get there a little faster. What we're finding is those HOV lanes are now also congested. So even though we're carpooling, everybody is stuck on the HOV lane. So we call that degradation. One of the things that I find fascinating is we always act, and it's not just in Southern California, it's across the state, having worked at Caltrans for many years. Each county tends to act like it's its own republic. And so we want to be special. We do things in our counties that are special. But what we find is, for the traveling public, they don't even know when they cross the county boundary lines. And so the notion, and this is one of the things I think I think Caltrans should be proud of, they try to make things as even as possible across the state. So if you showed up from somewhere and you landed in San Francisco and you drove all the way to LA, there's some sense of continuity and semblance in the system. The same has to be applied to how we manage the express lane system. There has to be some regional sense to it, some uniformity to it. And as we do that, it goes into how what kind of transponders you use, how you sign it, what information people have. So when they cross county lines or they cross from one highway to the next, there is some sense of familiarity with the use of it, and it makes it even more efficient. Some of the screening criteria that we would consider, because oftentimes people think when you price, it's about collecting money. You couldn't collect enough money from the system, from pricing, to do what we need to do on the system, quite frankly. Really, the pricing is about managing the system. It's about throughput. It's about having a measure of free flow. So trying to make sure that the first obligation is for mobility, for speed improvement, for person throughput, and also to be mindful of the user time, the value of the time that people are spending. Keeping that in mind is how you manage the system, and assuring people that when we say you will be able to get from point A to point B in X amount of time, that the system allows you and guarantees you that to be able to fulfill the economic objectives that you have. We would obviously, as we go into the planning process, be looking at the cost of building the system out and making sure there are those connectivities, and ultimately what the revenue potential is, and that revenue potential will add to our capacity to be able to build and maintain the system even further. We had three particular intents. So like I said, one was to manage demand. We were also looking to relieve congestion to the extent possible, but also the third, which is just as important, is to offer choice. So when you have the choice of either paying or not paying, or you have a choice of being on a transit system that could use the system at will, you then have a variety of ways to move around, and it enhances your mobility. And in thinking of the system, you also have to think about the different ways in which the system can be priced. The one that we're most familiar with is the network of express lanes that you see around, whether it's on the 10 or on the 110 in LA County, or the Orange County toll roads and the express lanes under construction in 405. So we're used to those as the pricing options we have. But there are other elements of pricing that you can also think about. Whether it's if there's an area of intense demand, can we price going in and out of it? This has been done in other places like in London and in the Scandinavian countries where you have a cordon pricing, where they cost you X amount to go into an area. One has to be careful how that's instituted so that you don't penalize people that live in the area for living in an area that's attractive for folks to come into. So cordon pricing is one element of the conversation that we have to think about. And my sense is, because I'm a technology optimist, my sense is with technology today, the cordon pricing idea is actually more realistic than it used to be. And so it's within reach and allows us to be able to be more surgical in the way we actually price the system. You've also heard about mileage-based user fee. We currently right now fund our transportation system based on gasoline consumption, which is inefficient in of itself. We've always felt we needed to change, but there was this inertia about when do you change, how do you change. The state of California, the Department of Transportation just concluded a pilot on mileage-based user fee, which was rather successful. But so that report is going to the legislature, and there will be discussion about how that's implemented. But better yet, the state of Oregon has already implemented mileage-based user fee, and several other countries have done that. And what that means is you actually pay for what you use, and it's a little more efficient, especially as we see the fleet begin to turn over away from consuming gasoline to just using the system. And so that's another area of pricing that we need to keep in mind. And as we think about this, we have to talk about what gaps we have in the system, because oftentimes you get on a managed lane and you travel a little bit down the road and then you have to get off and you're back in traffic, and it doesn't quite incentivize its use. And so we have to start thinking about how we complete the system gaps that we have, how we expand the transit system to provide that choice, and also how we expand some of our active transportation components of the system such that not everybody needs to get on in a car and drive. I saw a statistic the other day. I think something like 50 or 60% of trips are usually under 3 miles that people take on a regular basis. Most of those trips can be walking or bike trips, but we don't take them. We get on the freeway and get off the freeway. We do those things, and that's, again, one of those things we need to condition in terms of how we use the system.